All right, think about this for a sec. Who do you think has more power to, totally mess up your life and change society as we know it? Is it governments, with all their laws and resources and whatnot? Or is it those people, those individuals swimming in more money than most of us can even fathom? Welcome to Dansplain. We're all about diving deep into the nitty-gritty. I'm Edward.
And I'm Lily.
So today we're tackling a question that's been around forever, and it's a real head-scratcher. Government versus rich people. Who's the greater evil? We dug into some serious analysis, the kind that breaks down what governments and the super rich actually do, how it sometimes backfires, and even their straight-up flops. We'll be throwing around numbers, looking at different perspectives, and even wrestling with that controversial question. Should anyone be a billionaire?
Yeah, we're not here to point fingers or anything. We just want to give you the lowdown so you can wrap your head around this whole mess. It's way more complicated than just good guys and bad guys. We got to go beyond the labels and see where the real potential for, disruption lies, good or bad.
Makes sense. So, Lily, let's get on the same page about who we're even talking about here. When we say governments, what should we keep in mind?
We're talking about the official systems that run things. They do the heavy lifting, making and enforcing laws, making sure we have roads and schools, the basics. And they keep the economy in check. But there's a catch. We're talking about a huge range here, a government where people have a say that's different from a dictatorship where one person calls all the shots. And don't forget, governments have some pretty unique powers. They can take your money through taxes, throw you in jail if you break the law, and even send in the troops if they have to. No individual has that kind of power, right?
Yeah, huge difference there. And on the flip side, we've got those rich people. Who are we actually zeroing in on here?
Well, rich is relative, right? But our analysis focuses on those with insane amounts of money, often the top 1%ers. And even more specifically, we're looking at those billionaires everyone's always talking about, Bezos, Musk, Gates, the names. Their wealth usually comes from being super successful in business or with investments, or sometimes they just inherited a ton of cash. But here's the thing. Their influence goes way beyond their personal bank accounts. They're calling the shots at huge corporations, they're pulling strings in politics, and they're shaping how everyone thinks through their charities and media appearances.
All right, so we've got our players defined. Let's get into the dirt. What are some of the criticisms our sources throw at governments?
Well, one big thing that keeps popping up is they're just not very efficient. And they waste a ton of money. Even in governments where people have a say, things can get bogged down in bureaucracy and slow to change. The U.S. federal government, for example, has over 2 million employees. And there's always this red tape holding everything back. Take the IRS, for instance. They've got 80,000 employees, yet they still can't seem to process taxes on time. And then there's that whole issue of just how much the government spends. The U.S. national debt is a whopping $34 trillion. It makes you wonder if they're spending our money wisely,
Yeah, I think everyone's felt that disconnect at some point, where are my tax dollars actually going? And then there's that whole thing about governments being corrupt. It seems like that always comes up.
Oh, yeah. Corruption is like a nasty bug that infects all kinds of governments. In dictatorships, it's usually blatant. The people in charge just steal a bunch of money and use their power to shut up anyone who disagrees. But even in democracies, you see it in sneaky ways, like when regulatory agencies get cozy with the industries they're supposed to be regulating. It's messed up. Our sources even brought up the U.S. Patriot Act as an example. They said the government used security as an excuse to spy on people, and a lot of folks felt like it was a violation of their privacy. And then, of course, there are the regulations themselves. They pile up and pile up. Some estimates say businesses in the U.S. spend trillions of dollars every year just to comply with all these regulations. It's crazy. Some people say all those regulations actually stifle innovation and economic growth.
Wow, that's a huge economic impact.
Yeah.
But I guess the scariest thing about governments is that they're the only ones who can actually use force to get their way.
Right. No matter how rich someone is, they don't have that power. Only governments can make you pay taxes, put you in jail, or use the military. It's crucial for keeping things in order and protecting the country, but it also means they have a crazy potential for abuse. And history is full of examples of governments gone bad, using their power to do some truly awful things. Think about genocides, oppressive regimes, and economies wrecked by terrible policies. It's a stark reminder that governments can do some serious damage on a massive scale.
Pretty heavy stuff to think about.
Yeah.
But now let's switch gears and talk about the other side of the coin. What about all that wealth concentrated in the hands of a few? What do our sources have to say about that?
The biggest concern is inequality and how wealth is just like piled up with a tiny group of people. The numbers are pretty shocking, actually. In the US, the top 1% controls about a third of all the wealth, while the bottom 50%, that's half the population, owns a measly 2%. It's crazy. And income inequality is just as bad. Most of the income growth goes straight to the top. This level of disparity makes it really hard for people to climb the economic ladder, and it breeds resentment and unrest. It's like a recipe for social instability.
It's not just about the numbers, is it? That kind of wealth has to translate into influence somehow.
Absolutely. The wealthy have all sorts of ways to influence politics. They can lobby, pour money into political campaigns, and fund think tanks and advocacy groups that push their agenda. This can lead to policies that benefit the rich and powerful at the expense of everyone else. Our sources pointed to some examples, like how Amazon apparently pays next to nothing in federal income taxes even when they're making a killing. They can hire fancy lawyers and lobbyists to find loopholes and avoid paying their fair share. And then you have companies like Tesla, which have gotten billions in government subsidies. It seems like wealth can buy you favorable treatment from the government.
So the argument is that this creates a vicious cycle where the rich get richer and everyone else gets left behind. And then there's that whole issue of the super rich not really contributing to society like they should.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, the freeloader critique. People point to things like offshore tax havens where the super rich stash trillions of dollars to avoid paying taxes. That's money that could be going towards schools, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it. And then there are concerns about how some big corporations treat their workers low wages, poor working conditions. It feels like some of these massive fortunes are built on exploiting workers. Now, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes what's good for the rich is good for everyone else. Like, if a successful entrepreneur creates a bunch of jobs. But the problem is when profit comes before people, when ethical lines get crossed.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential downsides of both powerful governments and concentrated wealth. But our sources also talk about the good stuff they can do, right? What about the case for governments?
Of course. Governments provide so many essential services that the private sector just wouldn't do well or wouldn't do fairly. Think about things like roads, bridges, garbage collection, all that basic stuff we rely on every day. And then there's education, healthcare, and social safety nets to help people who are struggling. Governments use things like progressive taxes and welfare programs to try and level the playing field and make sure everyone has a chance to succeed. And they can step in to regulate markets and prevent monopolies, which makes the economy more stable and fair.
So you're saying governments can create a more equal society where everyone has a safety net and a fair shot.
Exactly. When governments are effective and accountable to the people, they can lift millions out of poverty and improve everyone's lives. Our sources pointed to Scandinavia as a good example. They have high taxes and robust social programs, but they also have some of the lowest levels of inequality and the highest standards of living in the world. Even when governments aren't perfect, they can still have a massive impact on people's lives in a way that individual billionaires just can't match.
That's a strong argument for government. Now, what about the flip side? Why should we let individuals accumulate vast amounts of wealth?
One big argument is that it drives innovation and creates wealth for everyone. Think about it. So many of the world-changing companies and technologies we have today came from the ideas and investments of wealthy individuals. Amazon revolutionized how we shop and created millions of jobs globally. Tesla is pushing the boundaries of sustainable energy. Microsoft shaped the digital age. And a lot of startups that are creating the next wave of innovation are funded by venture capital, which comes from, you guessed it, wealthy investors. Plus, the top 1% in the U.S. pays a big chunk of federal income taxes. The idea is that when wealthy people succeed, it benefits everyone because it creates jobs, new products, and a stronger economy. It's not a zero-sum game.
Okay, so wealth creation can benefit society. What about philanthropy? A lot of wealthy people give away huge sums of money to charity.
Right. A lot of billionaires are big on philanthropy. They donate tons of money to tackle global issues. There's this thing called the Giving Pledge, where super rich people promise to give away most of their wealth to charity. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, has done amazing work in global health, spending billions to fight diseases like malaria and polio. Now, some people argue that philanthropy shouldn't be a substitute for fair taxes and government-funded social programs, and that's a valid point. But you can't deny the positive impact these private initiatives have on things like health, education, and poverty.
This brings us to a question that's been causing a lot of debate lately. Should there be a limit on how much wealth one person can have? Is it morally wrong to be a billionaire?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's a super complicated question that involves ethics, economics, and philosophy. A lot of people feel like extreme wealth is just wrong, especially when so many people are struggling to make ends meet. They argue that it's just not fair for some people to have so much while others have so little. And they think we should cap wealth and use that extra money to fund social programs. It's an idea that resonates with a lot of people.
But our sources also present a counterargument, right?
Yes, they do. They argue that putting limits on wealth could backfire. They say a lot of billionaires earned their fortunes by creating things that made life better for everyone, like new technologies and jobs. If you punish success, you might discourage people from taking risks and innovating, and that could hurt the economy in the long run. They even brought up examples of countries where attempts to redistribute wealth ended up causing economic chaos. So, while acknowledging that wealth inequality is a serious problem, they lean towards fixing the system rather than punishing individual success. They say we should focus on things like progressive taxes and closing tax loopholes instead of arbitrary wealth caps.
All right, we've heard both sides. Now for the big question. When we weigh the potential for harm, who's scarier, governments or the super rich?
Our sources make a strong case that governments have more potential to do harm. They're the only ones with the power to make and enforce laws, wage war, and control information. No individual, no matter how rich, can do that. Plus, governments often create the systems that the wealthy exploit. And when you look at history, the damage caused by governments, wars, genocides, economic disasters, it's just way bigger than anything individuals have done, even collectively.
Yeah, the scale is just totally different.
Yeah.
But what about intentions and accountability? Are governments more likely to do the right thing?
That's an important point. While the rich are mostly driven by profit, their actions can sometimes benefit everyone, like we talked about. Governments, on the other hand, are supposed to serve the public good, but in reality, they often fall short because of inefficiency, corruption, and self-serving politicians. And when it comes to accountability, the wealthy face some pressure from consumers and investors. If they make bad decisions, their businesses can fail and they can lose money. Governments, especially in undemocratic systems, often operate in secrecy and face very little accountability to the people they're supposed to serve.
So it's not as simple as saying one group is good and the other is evil. It's more about how power works within systems.
Exactly. The wealthy can use their money to influence government, and government policies can either help or hinder wealth accumulation. It's all connected. And the biggest danger is when power, whether it's in the hands of the government or the super rich, goes unchecked. It's not about demonizing one group or the other. It's about making sure that power is balanced and accountable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway about who's the bigger threat?
Our sources conclude that governments have more potential to be evil, in the sense that they can cause more widespread harm. While the wealthy can contribute to inequality and unfairly influence politics, those problems are often rooted in failures of government and regulation.
And what about the idea of capping wealth? Is that the solution?
Our sources say it's not that simple. Wealth often represents something valuable that someone created. And if you just cap it, you might discourage innovation and economic growth. They argue that instead of punishing success, we should focus on fixing the system. Things like progressive taxes, closing tax loopholes, and creating incentives for both responsible governance and wealth creation that benefits everyone. The bottom line is that we need to hold both governments and the wealthy accountable. Neither group is inherently evil, but power corrupts, and unchecked power in either domain can really hurt society. We need to create systems with transparency, fair rules, and balanced incentives. That's the only way to make sure that both government and the wealthy serve the public good.
That's a lot to think about. So listeners, what do you think? Given the immense power that both governments and the wealthy have, what specific mechanisms do we need to put in place to keep them in check and prevent them from abusing that power? It's a question worth pondering.
And if you found this deep dive into the complex relationship between governments and the wealthy insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and visit us at www.dansplain.xyz for our latest episodes, in-depth articles, information on our partner products, and much more.